Suddenly, I was in this tunnel. I looked up and I saw this light.
I had a very chaotic childhood, lots of trauma, lots of, sexual, emotional, physical trauma in my life growing up. I had parents that were drug addicts. I became an addict at a very young age. It's all that I knew how to cope with. Like my parents taught me how to use, their parents taught them how to use. And it's been that way for generations and generations. And it's exhausting being the one to break all the generational curses, but I guess that's what I signed up for. And, I don't mean that like my parents shot me up with drugs or that my whole life was misery, but there was a lot of very deep, dark contrast, but I saw that when my parents were going through an emotion, whether it was joy and elation or depression and sadness, they would use a substance and it would make them not feel that way anymore. And so I took mental notes and I said, oh, if that's all that I have to do to not feel the way that I feel, sign me up. And so, my life just became like a lot of numbing at a very early age. And like I said, my parents were both addicts and their addiction had reached just a new low in their life. And in 2007, they made a decision after having the lights turned off and being on the brink of eviction from yet again another apartment. The phone was turned off, the gas was turned off, no money, no prospects. So they made this decision that they had to stop using drugs. And they did that by committing suicide with one another because they didn't know that there was any way to stop using drugs without dying. And so, you can't even imagine what something like that is like. I was 23 when my parents did that. My sister was 18. We found them. They left notes. They were very short. There was no like big explanation, but I knew deep within me why they had done what they did. They were suffering and they just couldn't see a way out. They didn't know that there was tools to end suffering. And so for me in my own journey, I'm so grateful that I have found some tools in my life that my old narrative doesn't ever have to be my new narrative again. And even this experience holds no bondage over my present or my future. So I'm going to share a little bit about my transformation with addiction, because that's really where my spiritual awakening, that's the shift for me. After the death of my parents, drugs became my parents. They became my higher power. They became my whole life, my whole universe, my entire identity. I even have like tattoos all over me that are like martini glasses and liquor bottles and cigarettes. Like this was me. I was a party girl, that was what I thought my identity was. But it was never really a party. It was just like a numbing agent to help me not feel this huge gaping wound of abandonment and rejection that I felt not only from my parents, but from the world. I felt so victimized. And, at some point I made a decision that I was no longer going to be a victim to my circumstance. I was going to be the abuser in people's lives now. I was going to be the one to be the perpetrator, because I was so tired of being victimized. And I did that. I caused a lot of harm in my life. It's not just like I'm a victim to all these sad circumstances. I really did cause a lot of harm. So my addiction progressed. It changed shape over the course of my life. Many times I've hit lots of different bottoms in my life. And the bottom that really transformed my life was this overdose that I experienced, where I had a near-death-like experience. I didn't actually die, but I was transported to the space of eternity, the same space that near-death experiencers describe. I have some language for what happened to me now. I had a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, which Kundalini energy is described as life force energy. We have a spiritual body that is centered in our chakra system. And so for me, all of my chakras opened up and activated all at the exact same moment after this overdose of drugs that I had taken. And it was a jarring physical experience. Like my body was shaking and convulsing as these things were happening. And when my third eye and my crown opened, it felt like my spirit shot straight out of my body and into heaven. And I remember being guided into the space of heaven by my father's voice, my boyfriend's voice, another masculine energy that I had encountered in life. They kind of all morphed into this one energy. They guided me through heaven. And when I got to, it felt like kind of like a plateau, which was like sort of like this school or like this base, I guess I'll call it. And it felt like in that moment I had woken up from a dream. And I kind of like shook my figurative head because there was like no body there. And I just went, whoa, that was crazy. And I felt like I was waking up from a dream, and I couldn't remember any of my human life. I could only grab at like 3 seconds of the dream. And the only thing that I could remember was that my parents had committed suicide. And I just kept going like, whoa, that was so messed up. That was so weird. But I had this intense feeling of reunion. I was home. And it just felt like every fractured piece of myself was glued back together in this space. It was this intense feeling of safety and security. And I finally felt like I was home. And while I was in that space, I was so happy to be there. And they told me that I had to go back. And I was like, I'm not going back. And so they told me that they downloaded me with this belief that I was a spiritual soldier. I was sent on a mission. I volunteered for it to come to Earth, to uplift the consciousness of the planet from a level of 3rd dimensional thinking to 5th dimensional thinking, and that I had to go back to complete the mission. But the first part of my life was like boot camp, and the second part of my life would be carrying out the mission. And I was like, not interested in this. I was like, that's a really cool story, but I'm not going back. I'm going to watch the show from up here. I said, you guys don't tell us what Earth is actually like. It's way more challenging than anybody described to me, and I'm not going back. And they told me that I had to. They kept affirming that I must return. And so they took me through my pre-birth planning so that I could feel a little bit more at ease with coming back to Earth, or I think that was their intention anyway. And so they downloaded me with my pre-birth plan, and it played out in my mind's eye, kind of like a movie. So in the movie, they showed me that I, as a soul, had chosen everything that had ever happened to me in my life, all these major plot points. And they showed me the moment when I did that. So it looked like a grocery store in my mind's eye. And there was a man, he was guiding me with this empty grocery cart. He was wearing a plaid blazer and a fedora. And he took me through the aisles of this grocery store, and he said, okay, pick your life. And so it looked like there was cereal boxes along the edge of these aisles, and each cereal box had a life experience on it. And so I just like took my arm out and went all the way through and put all of these boxes in the cart. I was like, I want to experience everything: molestation. I want to experience sex work. I want to drug addiction, depravity, manipulation, thievery, the double suicide of my parents. Like there was all of these experiences that I had put into the cart. And then there were some experiences that I hadn't actually gotten to yet. So overcoming, recovery, spiritual awakening, being an author, being an advocate, like all being of service, all of these amazing transformative things, but I had not experienced any of that yet. And so again, they took me through this whole little movie, and I said, okay, I understand. I chose all of it. And it was like this great moment of release. It felt like 2 tons of bondage had come off of me. I was no longer a victim to my circumstance. I was actually a divine co-creator of my experience. I had chosen all of these lessons for myself for the evolvement of my soul, and to assist the collective in awakening. I chose all of these very dense experiences to transmute them into light, not only for my own spirit, but for universal spirit. And I said, this is so cool. Thank you for this belief. Again, I'm still not going back. And I transformed into a small child. And I was like, again, this is all in my mind's eye. I didn't actually have a body, but it felt like it. Like stomping my feet and my hands on the ground, screaming, crying, I won't go back. You can't make me go back. No, no, no. And I said, I definitely cannot go back into her. And I could see myself outside of myself. My body was in my bathroom. And they said, okay, you don't have to go back into her, but you do have to go back. And so we'll show you the baby that you'll be born into. And so they showed me this baby. She was beautiful. They showed me everything about her gender, her ethnicity, where she would be born, who her parents were, her adversity, her mission, her purpose. And because I hadn't gotten through my entire grocery cart of experience, I was going to take that same grocery cart with me into the life of this baby. And so I would have to relive all of the things that I had already lived in order to transmute and to come to the other side of the light. And so I threw my figurative hands up in the air and I said, oh, I definitely cannot start from zero. If I absolutely have to go back, I'll go back into her. And I said, but I want you guys to know, like, I feel like she's glitched. She needs way too much healing. There's no way that we can accomplish this, but whatever, I'll go back into her. And so I found myself sort of sifting back into my awareness, and they just said, trust us, it won't be the way that it was before. And I was like, I do not trust you. I came back into my body. And, I just wrote this whole thing off as drug-induced psychosis, because all I knew was that I had taken a bunch of drugs. And then I thought I was talking to God or whoever these beings were. And so I just wrote the whole thing off. And then the universe, my higher power, source, stepped in and made themselves known in this very loud, tangible way. All of these divine synchronicities started to happen to get me onto a different path. All the drug dealers that I had been dealing with for over a decade all simultaneously decided to change their lives and stop selling substances. So now I had no way to get them. And it was just so bizarre that it was all these different people from these different areas of my life were all having a mirrored experience of turning a new leaf. And yeah, I was really sick because I didn't have any drugs and I was an opiate addict for over 20 years. And so I found myself on day 3 of heroin withdrawal, which is just, the absolute worst. It's just you're sick, coming from both ends, feels like your skin is on fire, your bones are crackling, everything hurts and aches. And I was so sick. And I said out loud, damn, I couldn't even kill myself if I wanted to, because I'm so sick that I can't even get up out of bed and figure out a way to kill myself. And right then I heard a voice and it told me that I could request what I wanted fixed. And, I was in the throes of desperation, the gift of desperation, the acronym GOD, right? This was my God moment. And so I heard this weird voice and I was like, okay, I'll believe you, voice. I can request what I want fixed. I don't want to be physically dependent on heroin anymore. And then they told me to lay back and count back from 10. And I saw these 2 little men appear in my mind's eye. And they were, these white men. They were bald. They had these bulbous noses and they were wearing doctor's lab coats. They had these little lawnmowers and they started walking through the crevices of my mind. And as they walked through my mind, I felt these intense hot tingles. And I just knew that some sort of transformation was taking place. And so when they finished mapping out my mind, I felt a plunger on the crown of my head. And in this bright white flash, I was instantaneously healed out of day 3 of heroin withdrawal. Seconds before, I was sick all over myself, welcoming death. And then in this instant moment, I was completely healed. I jumped out of bed. I was crying out to God. I was so grateful. I couldn't believe that any of this was happening. And I felt very motivated to go tell every and anyone that I could. And so I went onto the New York City subway system and I was proselytizing and evangelizing. And I was trying to lay hands on people and heal them. And it was insane. But, I hadn't integrated any of my experience. I just knew that this really magical thing had just happened to me. And if it could happen for me, it could literally happen for anyone, because you could not have picked a more unworthy subject, or what the world would make you think is unworthy. For the contrast of my life, before my spiritual experience, I was an atheist, devout, militant atheist. I was an orphan to suicide. I was a drug addict, a prostitute, a manipulator, a liar, a thief, an abuser. And like, how could I be bestowed with grace, with healing and love, and be worthy of this? So I knew that if I was worthy, anybody is. And so after my experience, like proselytizing on the subway, I found myself just sitting on a train. I had no destination. This man appeared across from me. He was wearing a 12-step fellowship necklace. And I heard another voice in my mind, and it said, "That's your path. Follow him to a meeting." And, 12-step is for addiction recovery, all different kinds of addictions. There's lots of different programs. And I went to a meeting, and, like I heard hope, and I heard higher power. I heard source in people's shares. And I found myself in a meeting. It was this big, huge meeting, like 60, 70 people. And I had a thought that I just didn't know how to be a person. And then I heard a voice. It told me to turn my head to the right. And sitting 2 seats away from me was the program director of a long-term rehab here in Brooklyn, where I live. So I just had a thought that I didn't know how to be a person. And then I find myself sitting right next to a woman whose life's purpose, passion, and profession is teaching women how to be women again after the use of drugs and alcohol. And so I had this plan that I was going to talk to her after the meeting, but I had this very loud voice of doubt in my ear saying, like, "You can't ask a stranger for help. You don't deserve a different life. Just sit down and shut up and deal with it." And I knew that she was there for a reason. And so I was like hyping myself up the whole meeting, trying to ignore this very loud negative voice in my mind. And so the meeting ends and I go to walk over to her. And when I get over to where she was sitting, she was gone. She had left the meeting early. And I felt so defeated. And so with my head hanging, I walked to the bus to go home. And when I stepped onto the bus, that woman was sitting right there. She left the meeting early and was somehow on the exact same bus as me. And I ran up to her totally manic and insane. I was like, "Oh my God, this is totally divine. I think that you're an angel. You're sent to earth. You're here for me. I wanted to talk to you inside, but you're already gone. And now here you are. Oh my goodness, please, 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 can you help me?" And she just looked at me so calm and she said, "Yeah, we can help you. Come by tomorrow. We have a bed." And that sentence changed my whole life without my permission. I did not want transformation for myself. I had no idea what had happened to me. And so I went to that program the very next day with just the clothes on my back, and I started my journey. And in that program, I learned how to be a person, not only how to be a human and do things without using drugs to cope with my experience, but I also learned how to be a spiritual being. I had this insatiable thirst for knowledge. I read everything I could get my hands on about metaphysics and the law of attraction. I read every sacred text. I devoured these books, and I found my spirituality. Like I found truth in every sacred text, and I cherry picked what I liked out of it and I made it my own. And yeah, that program gave me so much. I stayed there for 17 months, which is like totally psychotic. I was there for a really long time. I really needed space to integrate and to figure out how to be a person. And I learned so much while I was there. I was able to go to school, and I have a career now in the recovery field. I'm of service. I work as a peer advocate. So my whole job is just like, "Hey, I'm in recovery. If I can do it, you can do it." And they pay me money for that. It's wild. But yeah, just self-disclosure, like being my most authentic self. I'm able to like truly be who I am at work. I don't have to hide the fact that I'm in recovery because it's part of my job. And yeah, I found all of my spiritual communities, like I belong to 12-step fellowship, and that's a spiritual program. And I have this beautiful relationship with a power greater than myself that I've been able to conceptualize and design on my own. It's like this beautiful sense of independent creativity. And I study the Bahai Faith. I have a wonderful Bahai community. We get together on Saturdays and we have meaningful conversations with each other. I study A Course in Miracles, which is a metaphysical text channeled by Jesus. And it's a reprogramming. It's a new way of life. And I study that scripture very closely as well. And I belong to a group for near-death experiencers and spiritual experiencers on the IANDS platform. And I also do service for Spiritual Awakening International for their sharing circles as well. And these are my spiritual communities, and I remain open-minded to having new spiritual communities come my way. I've found the members of my soul family today. And that was the greatest gift of my spiritual experience. It wasn't just the fact that I had some newly heightened spiritual senses, but also that I have the ability to magnetize my soul family to me so that I don't feel so alone on this journey. And I find that inside of my communities. And that's my story. I'm really grateful that I was able to share with you today. Thank you for giving me this space. I love connecting with people after I get to do interviews, because I feel like being in my purpose is not always to share. Sometimes it's just to listen to other people. And so I love being able to support whoever I can. I feel like spirit guides everybody to me that's meant for me. And so I have a YouTube. The handle is buddha.betty. That's my handle on everything, on Instagram, on Facebook. And I also have a podcast on the IANDS video YouTube. It's called Explore the Extraordinary Podcast. And if you're a spiritual experiencer and you'd like a platform to share your story on, this is a great opportunity at IANDS, we're expanding into all spiritual experiences. So yeah, those are great ways to get a hold of me. I'm sure there'll be my links in the description of the video. And, a big part of what comes from me sharing my experience is the transformation into recovery. There's so many people that are dealing with the experience of addiction. And there really are no words for me to explain to you what kind of depraved animal I was in active addiction before my spiritual experience. But it's not the person that's sitting here today. And if that can happen for me, it can literally happen for anybody. So please feel free to reach out and get support. That's the thing is in my addiction, I was so isolated. Even in the beginning of my spiritual integration, I was so isolated from other experiencers. So for me, the key is connection and community. And I can't even tell you how expansive my life is because of that. So yeah, there'll be links in the description, and I encourage anybody who feels called to please reach out.